When do you think is the appropriate age to have the talk with your child? This is a question many of us have very different opinions about, especially with this new generation of children becoming pregnant at an exceptionally high rate, as well as contracting STDs. DoSomething.org provided data that said about 750,000 teenagers will get pregnant every year, along with about 1 in 3 women will become pregnant before the age of 20. My purpose in stating these facts is to state a lot of this, I feel, is due to the lack of knowledge that parents are providing to their children, and even those that are waiting too late because their children have already began experimenting in sexual activities or have already formed their own opinions based on knowledge provided from outside sources. My personal stand is that the talk about sex should begin in elementary school around the ages of 7 to 10, and the talk should continue and mature throughout adolescence. Our older generations need to come to terms with the facts that if they are not the ones to teach their kids about sex, they will learn from someone or something else, whether good advice or bad. I would like to start off by giving my personal testimony about sex. To give this testimony about sex will be revealing that I began experimenting in sexual activities at the age of 12 and actually had sex for the first time at 14. In my household, my mother nor father never really had the talk with me. It was always just stated to wait until you're married or sex is for adults, not for children. But just because they didn't speak to me about it doesn't mean I was ignorant to what sex was, how it happened, what its purpose was, and even that there were different ways to have sex. All of this knowledge was obtained via internet, friends, family members my age, television, but mostly friends. Children my age who know just as much about sex as I do. And I can honestly state that when I chose to have sex, it wasn't because I was ready or I felt like I was so in love and had found that right one. It was because all my friends were doing it and I wanted to experience it for myself. Worst decision I've made thus far. What children fail to realize is all the responsibility that comes along with being sexually active. It's more than just a physical relationship, it's an emotional, mental, and spiritual investment with someone that shouldn't be taken lightly. In me stating this, I want readers to grasp the point that I feel like I would have had that personal talk with my parents about sex at an earlier age, not after I had already been engaging in the activity. My root and or decision making choices about sex might have turned out differently. Because even though I didn't start engaging in sexual activities until the age of 12, I knew what sex was and what it looked like at the age of 6. Now let's try and focus on sex and how the talk can be broken into stages. Like our children, everything should be done in stages, and having the talk about sex with your children should be no different. We know that it may not be the most gratifying talk you might have with your child, but it's very necessary. Bradford, who wrote When is the Right Time to Have the Talk with Your Kids, even stated, going over the proverbial birds and the bees with your kids can be downright uncomfortable, to say the least, but it is one talk you can't afford to evade. If you don't speak to them about it, you better believe a friend, relative, or someone else will. As parents, you have to ask yourself if you really want someone else influencing what goes on in your home. Because most times when children have received their information from another source, it's not likely for them to come back and communicate it with their parents. Parents need to come to terms with the fact that as uncomfortable as that the talk is for them to bring to their children, it's just as uncomfortable the opposite way around. There needs to be an open line of communication coming both ways for this talk to have the effect you would really like it to have. Let's move on to the development impact that sex education will have on your child if done properly. I don't want readers to get the wrong impression when I say that I feel as though parents should be beginning to have the sex talk with their children between ages 7 to 10. The earlier the better. I'm not saying that at this age it's time to sit your child down and explain to them the ins and outs of sex and then finish them off with the conversation by stating, if you do choose to have sex, don't forget to wrap it up. By all means, I don't feel that children at that age will comprehend that talk properly. Thus, the ending result is your daughter pregnant at 12 and your son contracted an STD at 11, all because they mistook the conversation you as a parent had with them as, let's go have sex because mommy and daddy told us it was okay. At this age is when you should be introducing your child to the basic knowledge of sex. And do state that yes, this is for adults, but also explain to them the purpose for sex. But don't forget the key word I stated above when I gave the specific age range was continuously. One can't assume that the conversation stops here because just as children go through stages before they enter adulthood, both mentally and physically, so should this conversation. Every time your child reaches a new milestone in development, the talk should be brought up again, and it should develop just as the child has. So by the time your child has reached adolescence, the conversation should be more about how to protect themselves along with preaching abstinence. I know there are a lot of parents out there that feel as though the sex talk should simply consist of drilling abstinence in their child's heads and simply telling them not to do it because it's not meant for them. This is where the talk can go wrong. I'm not saying that preaching abstinence to your child is wrong, but at the same time, it's not educating your child on the reality of the situation. Sex is something that they're going to think about whether you tell them to or not. It's in their biological makeup, especially once they've hit puberty. Boys begin having wet dreams and are getting their first erection. Girls are now wanting what they think to be a relationship with the opposite sex. And trust and believe that if you do not educate them, they will choose to find out for themselves, which could in turn end up in pregnancy. Something I didn't think was possible until I experienced it for myself in the 6th grade when one of my classmates had become pregnant by someone who was almost twice her age.